The brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp, brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp. The brothers.
You're now listening to Greg. It's the Brothers Wisp. Let's take
Hey everybody,
a ride.
this is Greg with the Brothers Wisp, number 113. Next thing on the list is start Skype recording. Obviously, I've already done that, thank goodness. I try and forget those things whenever possible. So today, we have a very special guest who gets dedicated solo airtime. He's such a big personality. His writer says nobody else can be on the podcast, and I'm limited to 10% of the conversation. So thank you, Andrew Thrift, for showing up today.
That's all right, Greg. Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely.
This is becoming a semi-regular thing for us.
Let's not put labels on it, right? It gets weird right if you do that. So let's keep it casual. So let's see. Today we have our normal round of sponsors. So thank you, Sonar. Sonar has been sponsoring us for forever. I really appreciate these guys. Scalable, intuitive, comprehensive ISP billing solution. You can find more information about them at sonar.software. So in essence, if you're running WISP and you want your management and billing kind of all in one place, they're a good candidate for that. So pop on and check them out. We also have Cambium. They are sponsoring us. New sponsor, hardware sponsor. They're doing the EPMP bundle. And I'll give you the quick and dirty rundown. I'll do it in reverse order so it sounds fresh and new. So it doesn't sound like I'm saying the same thing. No sales pitch. They do an hour of time, one-on-one session with an engineering. Oh, I take that back. It's 2 hours with an engineer. You get to ask him any questions, what his favorite colors are. What's his favorite ice cream? Andrew Thrift, what would be your answer to that?
Hokey pokey.
I've never heard of that, but I assume it has something to do with ground-up kangaroos.
Pretty much, yeah. No, it's vanilla with chunks of toffee in it. It's really good. Hard toffee.
That sounds baller. We have this place called Dairy Queen here, and I get a blast, is what they call it, and it's like a Heath Blizzard. That's what it is. So it's basically
Heath
toffee
Blizzard.
and chocolate all mixed up. I love that in vanilla ice cream. Anyway, I digress. They also have RF Elements Twist. The pack comes with the RF Elements Twist horn. You get 6 months of WISP.net automation. Automation and billing. They're basically saying this is a $6,000 value for $19.95. So it sounds like a really good starter pack if you want to get in there and get wild. And we will put a link in the description. They need to give me like a Bitly link or something really short so I can just like shout it out. That would be, or actually I could do that. I need to do that. I need to stop being lazy. So guys, look in the description for the link. So let's get to the things. Now we've got the vegetables out of the way. It's time for the dessert. Andrew Thrift, you've got the document pulled up.
I do.
You are the current reigning routing Jesus. You've
I don't know how I earned that position, Greg.
You unseated the previous routing Jesus. So let's get in there and talk about it. So I guess the news of the day is Mikrotik version 7.0 beta 7/8. Right? It's kind of 7.8.
Yep.
7 wasn't out very
It's
long
out there
before 8 popped out. So let's get down and dirty. What's the new and interesting things that are in there?
Well, this is the first release I'd actually call RouterOS version 7.
Shots
prior
fired.
to this, it was just basically V6 with a bunch of minor changes and no routing engine. Whereas now we've got the routing engine in it, so you can do Ospf and BGP at a basic level in this beta. Beta 7 was only out for a very short time until they realized there was a dependency they'd forgotten in the build, so they quickly got beta 8 out there. And the big thing is, it's got routing in it. It's very different if you're expecting it to be like RouterOS version 6 or iOS or any other routing system. It is not. It's still very early stages. Don't run this on anything other than a lab would be my recommendation.
So you were saying the way you actually configure it, right? The CLI, I guess, flow is a bit stilted at the moment. Is that a nice way of saying it?
Yes, it is. So if you've used version 7 previously, you would have noticed some changes, e.g. everything's in like a dot notation. So where a setting would previously be called BGP filter, for example, BGP underscore filter, it'll now be called .bgp filter. And I'm not sure if that's something to do with them making it more JSON-like or what the story is there, but they've changed the CLI pretty significantly. And the thing in the new routing engine that I've noticed straight away is it's not consistent. So some settings will have a dot in front of them, others won't. And likewise, when you do print commands, some of the output will have the new dot notation and some of it won't. So it seems like they've completed the engine, but the actual integration into the rest of Router OS is still an ongoing thing. And I kind of expected that. Like, it's a big undertaking. They can't just make it work perfectly on day one and have it all integrated. And yeah, so that was the first thing I noticed with it. And the way that you do things with it is also quite different. So the one that really made me kind of a little bit horrified was with Ospf. So on every router that I've ever used, you have a interfaces section and you have a networks section or configuration. And in your networks, you put your major supernets or your individual link subnets if you're so inclined. And then under interfaces, you can either have a dynamic all interface, which is what Mikrotik use, and a lot of other vendors like Extreme automatically have that. And you can change the Ospf type or mode, so it can either be in broadcast or point-to-point, and you can turn active or passive off and on, and that sort of thing. Well, in V7 at this point, it's all one screen. You basically have an interfaces screen, and in there you define your networks. So that means that you can't actually define an interface. You just define the network, and it automatically joins the interface, and you can set per subnet whether it's in passive mode or broadcast or point-to-point. So if you've done a lot of Ospf, you can probably see that removes one of the major flexibility points, and that is that on a large ISP, for example, I could just put their entire /16 in the networks tab, and it will automatically add all of my my sub-interfaces that are within that into the Ospf area and start either broadcasting on them, or if I've got them set to passive, they'll be in passive, but those subnets will be advertised across the rest of the routers. But in this version, that's not the case. You can't do that anymore. You need to specify the individual subnets if you want them to be in any mode other than the main one.
So you're basically saying you lose the ability to define kind of a supernet where multiple subnets. So you actually have to put whatever subnet is physically on that interface. You have to define that individual subnet.
Well, you could put the supernet, but that entire supernet will be locked to one mode. So I guess you could do this. I guess you could do the supernet and lock it to, say, passive, and then you could define the individual smaller subnets and change them to broadcast if you wanted to. But it's a lot more work. That's a lot more work than how it was previously. Gotcha.
So whatever subnet you define, whatever size it happens to be, you're locking that to, say, passive or just regular. Unleaded.
That's right.
All right, that's that's very different.
Yeah, it's very different. I mean, if I take the 1,000-foot view, it kind of makes sense. But when you get into the detail of it, it's like, why is it done this way? Why have they changed it? Like, yeah, it's a bit odd.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. I mean, you were talking about departures of old ways. So I know in like Cisco iOS, because obviously I know that crap better than anything else, is that it used to be the old way where you'd go into the Ospf process, you define networks, right, which were subnets of various sizes, and that would basically say run or don't run Ospf on these interfaces. Correct. And then you'd say, hey, passive interface, this one, that one, or you could say passive interface default, and then tell the ones to actually run. And then they eventually transitioned to where now those network commands are optional, and you can just go into a physical interface and say, hey, this interface is on this area. And but it still gives you more flexibility than it sounds like I'm hearing from this new configuration method from like it's interesting. I could be missing something, but I set up Ospf and got it working to a few routers, and yeah, I mean it worked the way I was configuring it, which seems to be the way that Mikrotik want you to configure it now. But it just wasn't very natural compared to Cisco or Juniper or Router OS v6 even. It was pretty different. No, maybe they thought they would have it fit the layer 2 VLANing flow. Maybe. Maybe they thought they were making it better. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. we don't want to do what everybody else is doing. We're doing our own thing over here. Yeah, and I got that up and running just to see that it worked, and then I also got BGP up and running. Now, BGP, the workflow is completely different, but it actually made sense, so I'll give them that.
So they've added a bunch of features that I have not seen on anything else. So I've used like Cisco's, Juniper's, Extremes to do BGP, Open BGPD, Bird, Go BGP, you name it, like lots of different routing engines. And they've added a bunch of features that nothing else has. And the big one is that they now have a template-based configuration. Now, the thing I can think this is closest to is the BGP templates that you have in iOS and iOS XE, where you can define a template and then per pair you can set that template. Well, RouterOS v7 now has a feature like that, but they've taken it one step further in that you can have completely dynamic remote pairs. So your remote pair can be set to have a dynamic AS or a dynamic IP address. So you can have these dummy pairs that effectively sit there, or the BGP listener sits there, and it will accept a connection from any remote pair in a particular subnet with any AS. So if you want to run a route server for an internet exchange or something like that, this would be a pretty cool feature. But the downside is you have to use templates for everything. So previously you could go in and you'd have a pair screen. You could jump in there, configure an IP address or remote AS, and Bob's your uncle, you've got BGP stood up to that remote pair. Now there's another step. You have to create a template. You have to set your local AS and a bunch of other settings. You then have to create a connection. So they've changed it from pairs to connections, and in that connection you can define the IP address and the AS of the remote site. So the workflow is quite different, but it allows a whole bunch of possibilities that weren't previously possible in RouterOS.
That's interesting, man. I'm just I'm thinking the implications of that. So what's what are so the I mean, first thing I think about is anything that's going to respond like that. Theoretically, you could denial of service that device.
That was the first thing I thought about too, Greg. Yeah, you could definitely. Like, the templates don't appear to have safe defaults in them, as well, was the other concerning thing. There was nothing that said that you had to lock it. There was no option that said accept all the pairs or whatever. It was kind of like just defining the subnet. So hopefully they get some safe defaults in there. I mean, I've only taken a cursory glance at it so far, though. Maybe I'm missing something. But I would have thought they need to have something in there to make it a bit more secure in that regard. Because otherwise, yeah, you could effectively create BGP sessions from any device, and if you've got multi-hop turned on, it could be from anywhere on the internet.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking so long as there's no multi-hop, they couldn't like peer with you, but they could still hammer that port and
definitely
do some funky stuff. But then again, so I guess you could create firewall rules, but that kind of undoes the whole concept of having the unless you wanted to lock it down to a specific subnet and then anything in that. So I mean, that makes sense, I guess.
I've done that before with Open BGPD, and in fact a lot of the smaller WISPs that I've set up with Open BGPD for a route reflector, the reason I've used it is because they can define their entire supernet, and then any router within it can connect to the route reflector, and it makes my life real easy. I can script all of those POP rollouts. But yeah, it's a cool idea.
yeah, it's cool, and I like the idea of templates. It doesn't seem like too many additional hoops to jump through either, right?
It's not. It's just the first time I saw it, I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, where's the neighbors? Where are the pairs? And it's not called neighbors and pairs anymore. It's called connections.
Everything you are accustomed to, it's slightly different. I get it. So
that's right.
Just, it's like you speak Spanish and now you got to try and talk to somebody who's speaking Portuguese. It's kind of close.
Yeah.
Sort of.
But the thing is, I mean, previously, if you had iOS experience, you could jump on a Mikrotik router and stumble your way through a pretty successful BGP configuration, whereas now you're actually going to have to go and read the manual.
Well, I'm sure just a small handful of examples will probably make it really simple, and I'm sure they'll have all that stuff in the wiki. And then, once you do it a couple times, it'll probably stick, right?
That's right. The other thing I noticed is there's still, this is one thing that stood out as something that's going to confuse new users. Instead of referring to everything as an AFI or an address family, they interpose the terms. So some of them are AFI and some of them are address family. So you never, if you didn't know what that was, you'd get confused. So there's that as well. I mean, maybe they actually refer to something different now in version 7, but traditionally they've meant the same thing. So yeah, there was a lot of that there. I haven't really played with it deeply yet. I haven't had the time to, but yeah. I've talked to a few of the other guys that have done a lot with Mikrotik routing in the past, like Kevin Myers and a few of the other guys, and they're all in the same camp. Nobody's kind of got the time to dedicate to looking at it at the moment because everyone's so busy with work. But yeah, I know a few of us in the next week are going to throw it behind some route simulators and see what it really does.
That's cool. Yeah, and they said, so I'm looking at the change logs. It says enable BGP support with multi-core peer processing. So I guess, Wayne, I assume that the only BGP implementation they were going to put in there would have the multi-peer or multi-core peer processing. I guess they just did that so that people would say, "Hey, here's this new cool thing," right?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, it's still not true multi-core BGP. I mean, it's not really technically possible to do that. So effectively what it does is it runs either a process or a thread per peer. Each one has its own RIB. It takes all the routes into there, pre-filters them, pre-inspects them, and then it does another pass where it pushes them into the main RIB, and then from there they go into the forwarding information base. So that's a huge change. If you're new to Router OS, you might not know this. If you've been on it for a while, you probably do. In Router OS version 6, there's effectively no separate concept of RIB and FIB. If it's in the RIB, it's in the FIB, whereas now they are separate. So yeah, that brings on some other possibilities, which we'll talk about in a minute as well.
Weren't you suggesting that that's how all the other big boys out there do it?
They do. So iOS, at least on iOS XE, XR might be different, but iOS XE effectively has a single process that does all of the routing. So OSPF, RIP, BGP, you name it's all done in a single process. Junos is similar before version 17. So before version 17, again, they have the RPD process. Literally everything's done in it, and I've seen some pretty horrific things happen there as well. Malformed OSPF taking your RSVP offline and all sorts of lovelies. And then, yeah, from version 17, I think they've started to fork it out into different components, but it still effectively feeds back into that main RPD. The closest to having true multi-core BGP is Nokia's or Alcatel-Lucent's SROS, or Service Router Operating System, and it uses the same method that Mikrotik are now using, where it effectively has a process per peer, and then they feed back into a central process that pumps into the FIB. So Mikrotik are definitely heading in the right direction here. I think it's going to be interesting when this is thrown behind some route simulators and have had some filters put into it to see if it works perfectly, because I mean, I'm always skeptical until I see things working, but yeah, well, it's a bit more complexity.
And to keep in mind too, right, this is the first public beta release of the routing engine, so this is the first time anybody out in the real world can even touch it. So
and they've been working on it since like 2010, I think, was the last time they put out any solid updates into version 6. Since then, it's all been bug fixes or minor OSPF fixes that have happened in it. This is the first major one. I think in 2013 they did a big fix to do with MPLS and OSPF in version 6, but again, it was just a fix. So this is the first major thing to happen to routing since 2010, really.
Interesting. So I've got something that's burning up my brain that I want to pick this thread apart a little bit. Well, you mentioned they were, you said the format with the dot notation felt very JSON-like to you, and that really intrigues me.
I mean, I don't know what they're doing. Can't read their minds. They think different from us, Greg.
All right. Well, here's exactly where my brain went. And I'm sure you're going to quickly understand why. Is that with JSON format, that is easily transferable over to YAML format, because they are almost one and the same.
It is.
And there are so many. So I don't know, there's this product I've heard of called Ansible that has like all of these amazing functions that convert JSON to YAML, YAML to JSON. It does a lot of interoperation with that. So if you could have, I don't know, say configuration management database as your source of truth, and everything's in JSON format, and this Joker takes JSON formatted configurations, then automating your entire implementation, your management, all of your infrastructure becomes trivial at that point.
It would be amazing, Greg. Like previously, they had the API. They had that API, but everyone I know who's used it for any length of time says it's slow, and why does it work different from everything else? And some of them get quite passionate and angry about that.
Well,
So if they move to JSON format, that means they don't need all of those different libraries for Python and .NET and you name it. They can effectively just say, hey, we support JSON. They make their life easier. They make everyone else's life easier. It's just going to be a good thing.
Yeah. Like we're building out a lab for some of the Ansible folks here to use, and we're using a Mikrotik as the border router. And we're trying to automate this thing as much as possible. And so Jimmy, being the super kung fu wizard he is, he's writing systems where we can, like the system's going to automatically provision stuff on there, but it's like, how do you do firewall updates? And so he's having to write these monster parsers for like firewall rules and stuff. And I mean, the way his brain works, it's going to be brilliant when he's done. But I can't not think how much simpler life would be if we could just define what we want the state of the firewall to look like, and it would push it and not have to go in and do all this interpretation. All this. So, I mean, it would make every update on this thing so much simpler if we could just define, hey, this is what we want the state to look like, and it would, boom, put it on there. That would be amazing.
And another thing that I've been harassing Mikrotik about for some time is the ability to do streaming telemetry. So in Junos, they have this thing called JTI, or Juniper Telemetry Interface, where effectively you can use a pub-sub model. So effectively you point it to a server, which is a gRPC, Google RPC server, and you tell it what subjects you want to send to that telemetry server, and then Junos streams the telemetry to that server. And you can then use systems like Grafana or Kibana to display that information in whatever format you want on your live NOC SOC dashboards, to 1 minute averages, or even better if you want. So if Mikrotik are supporting JSON and that dot notation, it certainly makes using streaming telemetry, at least to gRPC, trivial for them.
And when you're talking about telemetry, right, a lot of us think in the old SNMP model where the publisher, whoever makes the equipment, puts out their SNMP OIDs, and this is the locked-in set of information that you're ever going to be able to pull from this device until we do a software update. And then I say, hey, give me that piece of information, I pull that on demand. Whereas telemetry, I mean, it is like, it's basically, in essence, anything that exists on the box or moves through the box, you could say, hey, dump this, right?
Oh, exactly right. Yep. And that's what Arista have become pretty famous for, is they've supported it since near day dot, and a bunch of other vendors are starting to do it as well. It just makes network administrators' lives a lot easier. The format's easier to deal with. I mean, you still need SNMP on a network device, but yeah, this is certainly the better way of doing the telemetry side of things. Yeah,
that's killer. All right, so I'm looking at the list here, and I see, added layer 3 hardware offloading support for CRS 317.
Yeah. This has been a long time coming, mate.
I think since they announced they were using these chipsets in the 300 series, you started saying, oh my God, here's all this stuff they can start doing in the hardware. One of them was MPLS in the hardware, and one of them was like routing offload.
Layer 3.
So that's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's come to fruition.
It is. It's really interesting. Like, not all of the CRS3 series has the chips that can do that. Like, they've all got that same Marvell Prestera based chipset, and most of them are the DX series. But within that DX series of the Prestera chips, there's variations. So usually the ones that start with a 2 can only do layer 2. Ones that start with a 3 can do layer 3. The 82 series, which is what's in the CRS 317, that can do layer 3 as well. But this is a major improvement. Maybe it's a signal of other things that are to come hardware-wise in the future. I don't know. Don't want to read too much into it, but effectively what this means is that on the CRS 317 at least, now you can do up to 125,000 prefixes in the fib, and it can forward those in hardware.
125,000. Yeah. So the IPv4 table's up to about 580,000 routes here in the US. So you obviously can't hold everything, but you could hold a good chunk of internal stuff. And when I'm thinking about the 300 series of devices, that's the only one I can really picture in my head wanting to do heavy routing on.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the good thing with this is, if you're using this as a backbone router for a WISP or something, that's perfectly big enough. You probably you might have your local IXs in there if you're a bit crazy, but most of the time you're just going to have your internal Ospf routes and maybe a default. That's it. So it's going to be perfect. And I mean, I've used a bunch of other boxes like the Nokia 7210s and that are effectively a similar concept, and they can't hold this many routes. So it's pretty impressive that Mikrotik are putting 125,000 in there. At the moment, it's IPv4 only, so there's no IPv6, there's no multicast. I'm sure Mikrotik can add those at a later date, but baby steps, so this is definitely a good start. The other thing they can do that a bunch of other vendors have done, like Brocade, is they can summarize routes. So effectively you might have a fib with 500,000 routes in it, but in between the rib and the fib it summarizes them, so it consolidates a bunch of prefixes into one larger prefix automatically, and that means that you can effectively have closer to the full amount of routes but only using the smaller fib size. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's awesome.
It is. So Netflix actually do that exact thing with their aristas. Or they don't use routers anymore, they use aristas in front of their media caches, and they're doing the same thing, summarizing the routes. Well, they were, I think, on their new Jericho 2 boxes. They probably don't need to, but yeah. Yeah, so it's I don't know, this is definitely a step in the right direction. It means that Mikrotik can now do things in hardware. There are a few drawbacks to it, as we mentioned, IPv4 only. The other one is there are no ability to do any firewall rules on this.
Oh, because it's all offloaded on the hardware. It's not going to be aware.
No. So effectively, I mean, on any other platform, you could do ACLs, which are basic access control list with some layer 3 information in it. I'm sure that's possible on the chipsets, but it's not there now, and that just adds another layer of complexity for them to put into router OS. Maybe it'll come in the future, I don't know, but I'm happy to see what they've got for now.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, having this as the core router makes all kinds of sense, and
it does.
So, I mean, if you're looking at it through that lens, that makes a lot of sense. Where you wouldn't necessarily need a lot of I mean, you don't generally do a lot of filtering in your core router. You usually do that more towards the edge, right? Kind of at the periphery as things enter and exit.
Yep.
But it's not like somebody's going to try and pull, their. I say that, and as soon as I say that, I take it. Yeah, it's like nobody's going to try and use this as their border router, but people will absolutely try and use this as their border router.
They will.
Yeah, like you were saying that folks in New Zealand want a lot of functionality of their equipment, right? So they want it to do everything.
They do.
So, yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, doing WISP and ISP consulting, the amount of times I've jumped onto providers' boxes that have got a single uplink and they're holding a full table. It's like, why are you doing that? So a lot of the time, if people can do things, they will do them, even though there's no reason to do it. So, yeah.
That's fast. You know what? Talking about this stuff genuinely excites me. And I haven't seen anything really. I mean, I've seen lots of good things come out of Mikrotik, but I haven't seen anything for a while that genuinely excited me. And just the prospects of this new redesigned routing engine, and just how they're starting to dip into the layer through offload. I don't know, that really does that pushes the right buttons in my brain. Like just the idea that all of a sudden I'm going to get so much more performance out of my existing infrastructure, as well as the new products that are going to be able to take advantage of this. It just blows my mind.
I'm the same. Like, this is the most exciting thing that Mikrotik have done in a long time. Like, they've had some really cool products, like all
absolutely.
The 60 gigahertz stuff is pretty awesome. It was like market leading, and the CRSs originally, the 3 series, were kind of exciting, but you couldn't use them to their full potential. Whereas this is like, man, we're going to be able to do a lot of things with this, and a lot of ISPs are going to get a lot more mileage out of the Mikrotik products through these features.
For sure. Yeah. I think, like you mentioned, the 60 gigahertz stuff, I think that was a game changer. Like, they came in definitely. And I think they like decimated IgniteNet, and that's what those guys were really known for and doing. And I don't know anybody deploying their kit now. Like, Mikrotik have just murdered them. And then their switches now, like now that they're dropping the 48 port PoE stuff, and even when they were dropping the 24 port PoE in the 300 series, I've got 8 of those out in the field now. I know that's not impressive, but I'm pretty much exclusively deploying those now, and then not any other manufacturers. And I'm a big Cisco fanboy, and I've always just used their gray market stuff. But now, I don't want to anymore. So you're right. While that stuff was functional and great, it felt like the 24 port and the 48 port series switches were then just catching up. Welcome to 2005.
Well,
but I
the
get
big
it.
one,
Baby steps, like you said.
Yeah, the big one I've seen on a lot of the wireless ISP groups, and I've seen this in the field, is people deploying 3750s in their WISP towers, and they've got all these convoluted DC systems to power them, or big AC UPSs. And the reason they're deploying them is they get a 1U box that can power the radios, or most radios. It can do layer 3 routing and hardware. It's a known, quantity. You know it's going to work in Ospf, and that's going to work well on it. But the thing is, they use so much power, and even on the grey market, they're not super cheap, and you don't know how reliable it's going to be, because they're all grey market. Whereas now, with Mikrotik, once they kind of get this feature a bit more mature, you can use a CRS 317 in your towers, and it's going to be a reasonably priced piece of equipment that can do layer 3 as well, and it's going to use a hell of a lot less power than a 3750. The only thing is that this is again only available on that single model at the moment. Hopefully they release more models that support the layer 3 forwarding, like the CRS 328 series, for example. Maybe another version of that has layer 3 forwarding or similar.
Yeah. For the 3750s, the thing I can say about those is if you are using them layer 2, Cisco's spanning tree implementation is so rock solid compared to just about anybody else I've touched. They just, man, it really works. And I've noticed, if you have a switch Cisco network and you put a Mikrotik in there, it's just a little weird, the Mikrotik, whenever it's connected. And I'm not going to point fingers there. I just know that when it's like a homogeneous Cisco switch network, the SPF implementation just works. Not SPF, the STP.
Spanning tree.
Yeah, spanning tree implementation is just so clean.
I have to say, their defaults are pretty good. It's a monkey clicks button kind of thing. I think this is why a lot of guys who start with Cisco just stick with it, because you literally can bang a switch in, put almost no config on it, and spanning tree works. It just works. You don't have to do anything. Aruba have got reasonably close to it, which is probably why they're quite popular as well. But some of the other vendors, like Extreme, you almost need a PhD to work out how to configure spanning tree on the things. And I haven't actually tried spanning tree on the CRS series from Mikrotik. My use cases have always been different, where I haven't needed spanning tree. But it's interesting to hear your feedback and experience.
I've got it configured in an MDU environment where I've got the 317 in the core, and then I've got the 324s or whatever they are, the 24 port PoE guys out of the edge, and I've got spanning tree all the way through, and it's working fine. I haven't had any problems, so it's a solid implementation. The only problems I've ever had were really in the past, or when it's a mixed vendor environment. It just, for some reason, I don't know. You know how that stuff goes. So,
oh yeah.
You of anybody, you've touched a lot of pieces of equipment in a lot of environments. So.
Yeah, that reminds me, Greg. I had a customer with quite a big network. I think they had 6,000 odd edge ports on it. And it was a mix of Cisco 3750s and Aruba, it was HP ProCurve at the time, and Extreme, and then they introduced some new Dell Blade chassis, and those Dell Blade chassis have got their own Power Connect switches in them, and there was a spanning tree bug where no matter what any of your other devices were set to, the Dells became the root of the spanning tree.
Baller.
And change control process didn't quite work there, so the infrastructure team put these Dell things in without telling anybody, and the entire network across 3 campuses was just flapping for days before anyone figured out what had gone on. It was pretty horrific. So I learned fairly quickly how to filter out spanning tree BPDUs on Metro Ethernet links in that one.
What was interesting is I was in a Red Hat meeting. I don't know, everything blurs together, brother, but it was some point between April 6th and now, and they were talking about vendors' hardware that we're running into, and who we target, blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. Like when we're going to talk to a customer and what potentially might be in their environment. And so they basically talked about Cisco for a while, and then they said that but occasionally you run into these little guys like Juniper or Arista. I was like, what? I was like, God, from the world I come from, it's quite the inverse. Like in the ISP world, whenever you think of like what device you're going to put in there, usually like if it's like a heavy lifting routing piece, you're thinking Juniper. And so it's just, but Red Hat, is really targeting enterprise. Really big enterprise, mind you. But so when you're talking about switching and routing and stuff like that, I didn't realize how sewn up Cisco had the market as far as that stuff goes.
Yeah, they massively do. Like, especially switching at Cisco everywhere. And you might see a little bit of Meraki out in smaller enterprise. And education seems to be pretty strongly into Aruba stuff, mainly because of their lifetime warranty. But in enterprise itself, it's just Cisco, Cisco, Cisco. You don't see anything else.
Did HP buy Aruba and now they're branding like their switches as Aruba? Is that what happened?
I lost track, dude.
Right.
I think HP did buy Aruba for the wireless stuff, and now they're selling their ProCurve switches under that Aruba brand. They're the same thing though. They're the same 2930s, 2530s.
That seems weird.
With ProCurve.
Does Aruba have a bigger like market name than HP ProCurve? I've always heard like ProCurve and education were kind of like hand in hand,
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was odd, but Aruba must have had a better reputation or bigger brand name, or maybe they just wanted to differentiate it from HP. Because everyone associated HP ProCurve, whereas now it's Aruba. So
rebranding, trying something new. It's like new Coke, like in the 80s or whatever.
Like it's I was in the ISP land for so long that I got used to not seeing Cisco. Like every ISP, depending on what vertical they were in, had different products. Like big telcos seemed to run Nokia or Alcatel-Lucent with some Juniper in there, and then kind of mid-market ISPs were almost exclusively Juniper, and then you had spatterings of Cisco iOS XR devices and all sorts of things around the place. It wasn't just one vendor. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you get back into enterprise, it was like blinding. The teal was blinding.
It's to that point, most of the telcos that I connect to here, my BGP peer session was almost exclusively with Junipers. So a lot of times I was doing some kind of optical transport, so I was like riding a Sienna optical network, and then they would jam me into a Juniper, and I would peer with that guy, and then those would go up to big monster aggregation boxes, but that were probably like Nokias or something like that. It's not like they were at liberty to tell me what all that stuff was, but I always found that interesting.
Those big telcos buy a product and they bleed it for like 10 years. It's not like enterprise where you replace things every 3 years. In telco land, they'll buy like a Juniper or a Nokia and it'll be there for a solid 10 years, literally until the box dies.
That just kind of broke my brain. Like, because we're still buying gray market 3750s that were built 15 years ago. And then we're going to run those things for 10 years. It's like, it's like if you've got a gig port going to a user and say a 10 gig going up to your aggregation, it's like, do you really need to change that out every 3 years? Or is it just...
You don't.
You've depreciated the value of the product, so you got to trash it so that you can start writing it off in your taxes again? Or
this is something I've been kind of thinking a bit about recently, Greg. Is like with enterprise, they tend to change things so that they've got something to do. Like I've got this bit of this theory.
So bored.
It's like the migration into the cloud for a lot of organizations, it brought no benefits. It was just something cool for them to do. It's only if you've got a whole bunch of public-facing services that it really made a lot of sense, or things that needed to scale up and down rapidly. If you're just an organization that's heavily Microsoft-focused, it really didn't make much sense, especially if you're running like Oracle or a big ERP. It made no sense. So a lot of people moved into the cloud just to be buzzword compliant, whereas in telcos, they hate change. If they change something, that means that they've got a bunch of guys running around stressed out trying to improve or change their network. But does it bring any actual improvement to their end customers? No. Does it bring any revenue in? No. So they tend to have more stable systems and keep things in production for a lot longer. Yeah.
Well, we're saying this just out loud, but in the telco world, every time you touch something is an opportunity for you to get a whole bunch of nasty phone calls. And then like you said, weeks of OSPF flapping or whatever it happens to be, STP flap. You know what I mean? So it's like every time I touch something, I'm having to do upgrades on like a backbone router, like software upgrades. It's like you tell that thing to reload I don't care who you are, you're sweating until the ping returns on that thing.
Yeah.
And it always takes way longer than you think it should. So it's just the sheer panic inducing change windows. So I totally, it's like, because it's all about risk mitigation, right? That like all those guys have SLAs, all the big boys have SLAs tied to these circuits. And so while they do have change windows and they're pretty much absolved of all sin within those change windows, it's still, gremlins persist past the, it's happened to all of us. You do an upgrade, everything's fine, and then 8 a.m. when people really start stressing it, you start getting these weird phone calls. You've got to scramble to figure out what it was.
Definitely. I've worked for telcos like in the past. Like in the early 2000s, I was working for the second largest telco in New Zealand. And instead of changing things in their network, what they'd do is they'd build an entire parallel network to their existing core, and then they'd move services over to the new core one by one. So they'd deploy, like this is an example, when they were wanting to move from ATM, they were using it on their Juniper M10s, I think they were. They could have done Ethernet and ATM on those boxes, but they didn't. They built a complete parallel Ethernet network and then moved services over from the previous one.
Just so they could control every little piece.
They could test every piece. They could control every piece. If something didn't work, they could just move it back. And the amount of money involved in this was huge. But the risk, the risk was probably more than the money they spent, significantly more. So it was probably the right way to do it.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you use all the safety precautions, and then at the end you're like, why did I bother doing all that? Well, you actually avoided something that you didn't realize. You know what I mean? It's like, why does everybody need to wear a mask? So we went to Home Depot today to get a few things. We just got a couple of N95 masks that we're going out, and I think we were the only people in that whole store wearing masks. It was blowing my mind. People, we are straight back to normal here. It is so crazy. And it's like, why? It takes 2 seconds and it costs you nothing and it doesn't hurt you in any way. Just put a mask on. What is it? Even if it does nothing, the placebo effect will make me feel better. Why wouldn't you take the easy precautions? So I totally get that. But wow, man, that's a whole different level. That sounds like a lot of work, a lot of plumbing to put into place to make that migration happen. But makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Bananas. Well, anything else in the release 7, beta 7 stuff that's interesting?
There's a whole bunch of things we can talk about, Greg, but we got a bit sidetracked there, mate.
No, these rabbit holes. That's what the people love. It's what they tune in for. That and your hair, bud. So
thanks, Greg.
What else do we have in here that really tickles your fancy?
Okay, it's something that actually blew my mind in this release.
No.
And I kind of thought it was coming, but I wasn't sure. They have jumped kernel version, and not insignificantly. So in RouterOS version 6, they were stuck on that 3.7 kernel? It was some really odd kernel number. It wasn't an LTS kernel or anything. They were stuck on that since day dot. They just kept putting patches onto it. So their poor developers probably lost all their hair, have been manually backporting patches into this ancient kernel to make things work, whether they're from Qualcomm or upstream kernel, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like a nice process. But they've jumped from that. They went to the 4.4 or 4.14 kernel in earlier version 7s, and then they jumped straight from that up to 5.6.3, which is a very new kernel, and I'm actually amazed they have managed to get it working on all of their hardware. So, yeah, that's pretty aggressive. What does this mean? To most people, nothing, but it's going to bring about a whole bunch of improvements to RouterOS. One of them is that they now have the potential to put things like WireGuard into RouterOS. So a bunch of people have been screaming for this. It's a new VPN technology. I believe it's been talked about on this cast a little bit in the past by Thomas and so on. But it's a new VPN technology with a fixed crypto algorithm, and it's really lightweight. It can be audited easily for security flaws and things like that. There's a high chance we're going to see that pretty soon in RouterOS, just because of market demand and it seems to be the way things are going. It also brings about a whole bunch of other improvements from the upstream kernel, like VRF changes and stuff like that, as well as the way that I/O and network interfaces can be communicated with can be now done asynchronously in the newer kernel versions. So it means that you get slightly more performance because you're not waiting for one operation to complete before you go and run another one. There's a whole bunch of improvements like that. But the fact that Mikrotik have done this shows how serious they are about making version 7 a success.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like if you're putting all that time and effort to rewrite all these portions, why wouldn't you? Because I wrote down a bunch of little notes here. Let's see what you think about these. So one is, I'm assuming there's going to be a lot better driver support in the newer kernels, right? So it opens up to a lot more hardware options.
Yeah, there is. So even from version 4 onwards, there's been much better driver support. But yeah, in 5.6.3, it's going to support all the latest hardware. So if you're running this on x86 hardware or in virtual machines, you can now do PCIe pass-through for Intel i350s, i211s, X710s, X510s. All the newer Intel chipsets will now work on x86. All of the, Hyper-V virtual SCSI drivers now work perfectly. You get multi-queue support on your NICs. So I know in the past a bunch of guys like Kevin Myers and that have done performance tests on RouterOS version 6 in virtual machines and found that Hyper-V performed better than anything else. I'd be surprised now if all of the hypervisors aren't fairly equal in RouterOS v7, just because the thing that was keeping it back in the past was the lack of multi-queue support, whereas now there is multi-queue NIC support, so your IRQs get spread across all of the CPUs in your virtual machine. Performance is going to just naturally be a lot better. So things like that. Hopefully they add support for the Mellanox ConnectX NICs at some point, because a lot of people use those, and it would also mean you can run it on Hyper-V in their top performance tier and get pretty good performance out of it. So yeah, a lot of driver support.
That's baller. So also you were talking about WireGuard, and I think as VPN technologies go, give me more options, right? Just
definitely
give me all the options, because there's been so many situations where, oh, this tunneling protocol, it's blocked by that firewall, or this one, no, sorry, doesn't meet, blah, blah. And then eventually you end up having to do this weird hybrid of mishmash of things. And so it's, just one more tool in the toolbox for the naysayers out there. People that are just like, I don't really see how that would fit in. At some point, you're going to find out how this fits in, because you're going to run out of options, and this is going to save your bacon.
The one I see is if you go onto the Mikrotik forums or any other kind of forum where they're talking about WireGuard, people think it's like the golden, like it's going to fix all their problems. It's going to do all of these things that they can't do with IPsec, and it's not, guys. It's just another option. Its big benefit is the overheads are really tiny. It uses UDP and nothing else. It's good for roaming clients because it authenticates via certificate rather than IP address. But there's some downsides. It's layer 3 only. It doesn't dynamically allocate the remote parties or remote peers' IP address. So for inside the tunnel, you need to manually allocate those. So there's a bunch of negative points to it as well. I'm sure the dynamic IP addressing one's going to be added in the near future. But they've tried to keep it simple on purpose. They want to be able to audit this code really easily and find any security holes. They want it to work on containers and Docker instances, and they want it to work on everything. So they've had to simplify it quite a bit. IPsec's still always going to have its place, and OpenVPN will still have its place as well.
Yeah, so OpenVPN in their implementation in Mikrotik right now only does TCP, right? And you mentioned that WireGuard does UDP. So what does that mean for us?
It's just the overheads. It doesn't need to effectively do the whole TCP process where it waits for the remote party to confirm that the packet arrived. It can just pump through the next one. OpenVPN in version 7 supports UDP as well.
Oh, baller. There you go. So UDP versus TCP and the tunneling technologies. UDP, you should be able to get more throughput, right?
Correct.
All right.
Much higher throughput. Yeah.
Awesome. And so the first thing that popped in my head is you were talking about in version 7, they went from a 4. Kernel to a 5. Kernel. And it sounds like they did that within the span of months, right? Not years.
They did.
So what is that? Like in my head, the first thing that kind of conjured into mind was, what does that say about the code they're writing right now, that they can jump You know what I mean? That they can jump kernels that fast and that efficiently and have all of these things still work. It must mean that this rewrite has really put good systems and processes in place for them to be able to kind of up their game as far as kernel revisions go and things like. And it sounds like they're probably making their code a lot more modular, where they can snap pieces in and out. And you know, with modular code, I'm learning all this stuff. This is all new to me, but with modular code, you can update a small portion of code without, you know, having to worry about wrecking the entire monolithic application, right?
Correct. I think it's actually probably a part of that, but there's also probably a simpler explanation. So the big one was their previous generation of CCRs used that proprietary Tolera chipset, which the architecture is kind of half PPC, half MIPS. It's a bit funky, and the upstream companies dropped support for it. So for Mikrotik to get from the vendor-supported kernel up to a version 4 kernel, they probably had to write a lot of drivers or port the drivers by hand themselves with their own developers. And now that they've done that, they know how they work. Their developers know how to do it. They know the process. For them to jump up to a 5.x kernel is probably pretty easy. It's much harder for them to jump from no source code, no drivers, or limited source code up to a 4.x kernel, and going beyond that is going to be pretty easy for them.
So what you're saying is they've already reinvented the wheel, and so it's easier for them to make new wheels over and over?
That's right. I mean, there's pure speculation, of course. We don't know anything about this, but just what it looks like from the outside anyway.
It's a lot of fun to speculate. If they're not going to tell me, I'm going to make up the truth for them. So there you go.
Exactly right, Greg.
Let's see, what else is in here? Enabled RPKI support CLI only. Does that do anything for you?
It does. RPKI is something that I haven't personally needed in the past. I've seen it cause networks to come down and flaming fireballs in the past when people have tried to implement it. Won't name any names here, but people from New Zealand will know who I'm talking about. So it's a really amazing feature. Effectively, it signs routes and allows routes to be transferred between parties that are trusted. And a lot of people can use this internally to stop route hijacks or errors. You can actually use it, I guess, just like people will use LACP to stop loops on their network. They'll force LACP on all the ports between switches and stuff like that. You can use RPKI, make it as simple as requiring it to be signed for your routes to be transferred. It's just another form of security to make sure that people don't cock up the configuration. But most people are going to use it to exchange routes between parties on the public internet, and it's going to be brilliant for that. It's going to hopefully stop a lot of these route hijacks. It can still allow misconfiguration, but it's going to prevent a lot of it. Yeah. So what this means, though, is that CPU load for routes that are received on RPKI sessions is going to be significantly higher. So you'd be wanting to run some of the new ARM-based Mikrotiks or running this on CHRs or something like that. I mean, we don't know for sure until someone's benchmarked it on the old Tolera CCRs, but I suspect it's going to slaughter those things. Yeah, because it's effectively having to do a crypto hash on almost every route, in addition to the other stuff. So,
gotcha. Do you think at some point they'll be able to offload that into hardware?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I haven't looked at what crypto hashes it uses, but there's certainly a lot of them supported in hardware on both the new CCRs and the old ones. So there is the potential for that, Greg. Yeah.
Interesting.
But RPKI is one of those things that until recently no one gave a crap, like no one needed it, but a lot of the big providers like NTT and that are now supporting it and letting everyone know that if they don't have it before long, they won't be able to pair with them. And Google are really pushing it as well. So it's effectively forcing the internet to grow up a bit, I guess. Forcing everyone's hand. So RPKI is a very welcome addition. And I think if Mikrotik hadn't got this out there a year or 18 months from now, it would be a real problem for service providers that are using Mikrotiks.
Gotcha. Better now than never. RPKI. Do you think they'll backport that to the 6 stuff, or?
Unlikely.
Right.
Very unlikely.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess version 7 will be ready for prime time by the time these guys are making it mandatory. Then.
Hopefully.
All right.
It's up to to all the people listening to this podcast, I guess, to chuck it up in their labs and test the hell out of it. And some crazy people might even try putting it into production. Good luck to you. But all of the feedback from that's going to be valuable for Mikrotik to improve this and fix any bugs. I mean, yeah, it's a hard one. Like a lot of people would say, well, why aren't they releasing a stable product? But do you know how long it takes to develop routing engines? It's pretty hard work. So I think what they're doing is going to give a good result in the end, and hopefully reduce the amount of overhead on Mikrotik.
I think it was it Giannis? I'm gonna try and do my Giannis accent. I haven't heard him talk in years, so it's gonna be bad. But he was like routing, long hill to climb, something like that, in reference to other people trying to build engines or something. It's like it's not a small task, and I mean, I guess technically Mikrotik's been at it for like 15 years or something like that, or longer at this point. So
yeah, I think it took them about 4 years to develop the first routing engine. So before that they were using, was it Quagga? I can't remember. They were using one of the open source ones, and they hired some brain tissue, got it hacking away, and delivered the routing engine that was in, I can't remember, was it in version 4? There was routing test. So long ago. They had routing test, which was their new routing engine, and it was actually, I mean, considering it was from scratch, it was pretty impressive. It worked pretty well. And over time that evolved a little bit up until 2010 and kind of went dead after that. Well, they've been developing this new one, so it's taken them a lot longer to get this one out the door, but it's also got a lot more functionality in it. So
gotcha. It sounds like they probably had, like, you've got perspective now. So sometimes I've always heard, if you want to do something, just start, right? That's the best way to do it, is just get started. And so they got started, they did a lot of work and time and energy, and then they can kind of stand back from it and look at it and say, hey, what are the things we did right? What are the things we did wrong? And so when we rebuild this Joker from scratch, let's make sure we do all the things right. So that's really promising. So all of the naysayers out there hopefully will be quieted very soon.
Yeah, it's quite kind of funny. I've seen a few people poking fun at them still on Facebook and on the forums, like, just release version 7, and like version 7's actually been out for a while now. It's just most people don't know about it. They haven't publicized it, and that's probably a good thing. Like, you're always going to have your detractors and that out there, but if you give them something to, I guess, some ammunition, e.g. a very early version of version 7, they're just going to get themselves all worked up over it, whereas kind of keeping it quiet for a while and slowly releasing it out into the wild. That way the power users, the people that actually help you improve your product, are going to get to touch it and provide feedback before all the angry mob get their hands on it.
Well, the haters are going to be there no matter what. They're going to dislike you one way or the other. Yeah. So it's and you know what somebody told me, if you don't have haters, you're not doing it right. So if you don't have people that dislike you, you're not trying hard enough. So that's good.
That's right.
That's why I've got so many enemies.
One thing, like, I think we've talked about this briefly in the past, I can't remember if it was on the podcast, but we've certainly talked about it, is, I mean, for the price point, there's really no competition out there. So if you want to hate on them, that's fine. Find another product in the same price point that does a better job.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you go duct tape something together and tell me how well it goes for you. But yeah, I was going to say initially, that's why I use this stuff, because I couldn't afford anything else. And you know what? I find myself using this in a lot of situations where I can't afford something else, but to me it feels like it's the right product. It's the right fit. And when I think about how long it takes me to bang out a config in Cisco versus how long it takes me to bang out the identical config in Mikrotik, it is so much faster to do it in router.
It is, yeah. I think a lot of it, most people don't notice this when they've been using RouterOS for a while, but I think a big thing is the real-time feedback you get. So especially if you're using Winbox, you make a change, you can see the effects of that change immediately. You don't need to go and run a whole bunch of cryptic debug commands and read through thousands of lines of syslog to work out what the hell has gone on and if your change has been successful. You don't need to, I'll use a specific example here. When you're setting up a L2TP server on a Cisco device, you don't need to know all those cryptic radius and VPDN commands. On Mikrotik, you can see, hey, the tunnel came up. It's working. It's good.
And I love having Winbox open, and I love having my IP addresses right here, and then another tab with all of my my routing right there, and then my firewall rules. It's like that is like such a game changer. Instead of having to do a show command, copy all that, let me put that over here in this notepad, and let me do this, and then so like you said, yeah, that stuff updating live, and all the tools are right there available for me. I love it.
It is really good. So it's kind of, when you use Mikrotik for a number of years and you have to go back and jump on another platform, it can be quite hard because you've become so accustomed to it.
Yeah.
But
it's frustrating. I remember when I was first trying to use Mikrotik, when I was I was just really familiar with Cisco. It was frustrating, and then I got used to it, and then I grew to really enjoy it, and now it's so funny that it's kind of flip-flopped. So if I have to build, although, like in the ISP scenarios and gateways and stuff like that, I've just done that for so long. I guess that's comfortable. But like if I'm gonna configure like a Soho Cisco router, that's such a pain in the butt.
Oh yeah.
Configuring
the amount
DHCP,
of time you spend doing it.
Configuring DHCP server is a nightmare on a Cisco router. I don't know why it's so painful. They just
the thing with Cisco though,
setup button.
With Cisco is because they've had iOS for so long, it's a known quantity. They're scared to change anything. Like if they change the syntax of the DHCP server, imagine the uproar on that next version release.
It would riot. It's crazy.
And Mikrotik used to be a bit the same. Like they wouldn't change CLI options. Like I remember that damned IP over Ethernet, the DHCP one, where it would send the routes in the incorrect format. So the RFC said that it was going to be sent in a particular way, and Mikrotik had misinterpreted that and was sending the routes. So when you do a framed route, instead of it inserting it into the Mikrotik's routing table, it would send it as a DHCP option to the client. And it was like, what the hell are they doing? And then eventually I harassed them enough in tickets that they fixed it to make it the RFC behavior, but it wasn't the RFC behavior by default. It was still the broken behavior by default. You had to set another cryptic option to make it behave to the RFC. And I'm like, and the argument was, we don't want to change the CLI. We don't want to break existing config. Whereas they seem to have got away from that now, that they seem to be more willing to make changes for the greater good, I guess you'd say.
I still remember it blowing my mind when Winbox started listing everything in alphabetical order. That was like such a game changer. You didn't have to like hunt for the thing. Where is it? Oh my god.
It was really hard for me because I had the autopilot to find things in their really skewed order, and
that broke your brain. Yeah,
definitely did.
It's amazing how much your muscle memory can build up for this stuff.
Yeah. But one of the best things I did was actually moving to using other platforms all the time. So there was a long time there, like several years, where I just used Mikrotik and Extreme and probably HP Aruba switches. That was it. And it wasn't until the company I was working for had the budget to implement some other tin that I really got back into using Cisco and Juniper and other things like that. And it was actually really good because it kind of showed me the other side of the fence and got me familiar with other vendors' products and got me to think about different ways of doing things. Like the way that's in your muscle memory is not always the best way. And I know a lot of us that have been in the industry for a long time, like I think I've been in the industry for 21 years now or something, like you just get stuck in your ways and you don't like change, like, so being forced to do other things is always good.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you guys are stuck in the same boat where you're on a team and you never have enough people, you never have enough manpower, right? Until you'll hit 3 lulls in the year, and that's when the boss walks in and is like, why aren't you guys doing anything? But yeah, you never have you never have enough time or people to accomplish the task. And so sometimes, even though it's maybe not the best way, if the same way you've done it for 5 years works and you can get it done so fast and so effectively, you know what I mean?
That's right.
Sometimes those returns you would get from investigating new hardware and then doing the testing and then putting over here in like a development environment and then moving, it's like It's just sometimes that's not possible for everybody.
Sometimes the solution that works is the best solution.
Absolutely. And you'll go on these snipe hunts where you'll try all this new technology, you'll try all these things, and in the end you find out it was crap. It doesn't actually work the way you thought, and you end up right back where you started. I've done that more.
That brings me onto another tangent. Working in integrator land and service provider land, and that you go out there, or you bring on a new customer, or you acquire a new network, and you find something that is just really bad. You're like, why did they do it this way? What idiots! It was so wrong. And early in my career, I used to always be like that. I'd get into these little rages over things that other people had done. And now that I've been in it for a long time, I realize that those things were done that way for a reason. Either the person that gave them the instruction didn't know what they were doing, was an asshole, or they didn't have enough money to do it any differently. Like, there's always a reason. Very few people want to do things the wrong way. It's actually quite rare that you come across incompetence. Things are usually done for a reason. So now whenever I see bad stuff, I'm just like, oh well, just fix it, whatever. It doesn't bother me.
It's just more I feel pity in those scenarios, like, oh God, this sucks. This guy probably had a hell of a time.
And again, like, I was contracting to a company a while ago where they had a reasonably extensive network deployed nationwide with like dark fiber, and they had leased waves between cities and stuff, and the network was so bad I just didn't know where to start because it was in production. I couldn't just rip it out and fix all of the mistakes. Like, it was just, you do get those situations, and you've just got to bite off little chunks and do it piece by piece until you've fixed the problem, and
that's so
take a more strategic approach to it.
I was talking to somebody the other I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago, and it was a guy, so he works at Red Hat, and he came over from Global Crossing. Like, I think he had worked at, anyway, I don't remember when he worked at Global Crossing, but it was just prior to Level 3's acquisition. So I think, no, CenturyLink acquired Global, I can't remember. I think Level 3 bought Global Crossing, and then CenturyLink probably, but anyway, I digress. I was just thinking about the scale of migration. It's like, I think I would rather commit hurry than try and migrate. You know what I mean? Like, you take a giant global carrier and another giant global carrier, and you're expected to mesh these networks together. I can't even begin to imagine the heartache and pain. And so I think it takes some very special type of people to be able to glue those types of networks together. I'm talking about somebody that doesn't have a significant other, doesn't have kids, hates pets, just wants to eat ramen and live in a dark cave and configure this stuff. I just don't see how even a team of humans could put that. It's like, I can't imagine building a rocket and going to the moon either, but we do it. Yeah. So
I don't know, but I mentioned it earlier, that telco that I was working for in the early 2000s, we had a guy there who'd been in the industry for like 30 plus years, and he'd been an engineer. He knew how all this stuff worked. He knew how serious outages were and that sort of thing on their bottom line. And he was effectively the project manager. He just kind of managed the entire network. He knew everything that was going on, but he didn't get his hands dirty. But he knew when people were bullshitting him, basically. So he kind of, he was able to manage this whole thing and manage all these characters and contractors, and it worked. And the quality of the network build was pretty high. And I'd say a lot of the other large providers, like their network, by New Zealand standards, it was pretty big, but by US standards, it would have been tiny. So these guys, like the CenturyLinks that are running absolutely humongous networks, they'll just have larger teams and more process, and things will move slower to prevent, I guess, things going too far astray.
Yeah. I know CenturyLink acquired Level 3 probably about 10 years ago, probably around 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. And up to 4 months ago, they were still talking about the networks as two different colors. So they still weren't merged and integrated. So it's like,
okay,
I feel so sorry for you, you poor bastard, if your network happened to cross one boundary into the other, because an engineer on the orange network didn't work on the red network. And there was communication between the two, but it wasn't always great. And then sometimes a ticket would just get passed over and it would die out there. And I ended up having an outage that was like 28 hours because there was a bad jumper in like a telco room somewhere in Houston. And it went from my level 3 circuit over to, or no, it went from my, because it was level 3 and then passed it over to CenturyLink hands, and they just couldn't communicate with me, escalating as absolutely as high as I could, yelling at, I don't really yell at people, but, but like going to as high echelon as I was capable of doing. And it still took almost, I think it was actually just short. It was like 2 hours shy of 2 days. So it was like 45 hours or something like that it took to find this bad jumper. It's just crazy.
In my career, I've had countless situations like that, Greg, and it's usually relating to acquisitions. So there's a big telco here in Australia that was going around. I mean, they publicly listed, got all this money all of a sudden, went around acquiring every other small-sized telco they could. So they had a mix of Cisco iOS XR, Nokia SROS, Juniper, old legacy iOS, all sorts of kit in their network, and they were all run as independent networks. So, but they merged the NOC. So instead of having individual teams to look after all the existing networks, they fired a whole bunch of people and merged it back to a single NOC that was based in Auckland that looked after Australia and New Zealand. Wow. And you'd ring up to get a minor change made. You'd be bringing up a new circuit and you'd want them to turn on LACP or whatever for redundancy, for your own chassis redundancy or whatever. And the guy would be like, oh, I don't know how to use Nokias. I'm just a Cisco guy. And I'm like, yeah, but you're the guy from the telco who's delivering my circuit on Nokia. Surely you can just look up the manual and work out how to do this. But the guys just seemed completely unprepared to change their spots and work on the network that they were now responsible for. And
man, that is,
it's like,
I mean, while that sucks, I just try and imagine what it would be like to be one of those engineers sitting in that NOC. Like how unfair is that to all of a sudden?
It was
being expected
definitely
to do that stuff.
I think the thing is, those guys were just in shock. I ended up finding the manuals. I went and found the Nokia manuals and sent the guy the manuals with the page numbers and said, look, this is what you need to do. And I felt like I was being a bit of a dick doing that. Yeah. But he was actually quite happy that I did it, because he was just under so much pressure that his brain couldn't fire and work this stuff out. So
that's what happens. Like when you're under duress, you go into your fight or flight mechanism, and your brain loses blood. It actually moves to the to your internal, or so it moves to your muscles and stuff. So the one part of your body that needs to actually work the best works the least. It's that's a really crappy side effect of our biology.
But it's just what happens in business, and when you've been around for a long time, you just start to realize that that's what's going on and not get too upset about it.
C'est la vie. Yeah. Such is life. Oh man, that's crazy. All right, Thrift, we've burned down the Mikrotik stuff. Let's talk about some other stuff. So I had just something I was thinking about when I was going on a walk with my wife the other day. We were talking about something or other and sort of rolled over to this subject. And it was kind of interesting to me because it's such a divergence from what I used to do and who I used to be. So do you know who RuPaul is?
No.
All right. Well, RuPaul is the biggest drag queen in the world, right? They call him the supermodel of the world. Anyway, I am obsessed with his show called Drag Race. So they get a bunch of drag queens on there, and it's like it's like a reality competition show. Anyway, it's crazy characters, interesting, but I found that I really like his insights and stuff like that. He's actually really interesting. Does a podcast. Anyway, he did this masterclass. Have you seen the masterclass stuff? The commercials, or at least yeah. So I saw that he did one, so I got a hold of it, and it's really fascinating to listen to because he's obviously had a crazy background, crazy childhood, crazy life in general, and he's had to do a whole lot of work on himself, and so. He was talking about how he goes in front of, thousands of people or tens of thousands of people, and you're like not nervous. And so I was thinking about it. It's like my personality has changed so much that I crave situations where I get to perform in front of people, like like now my job, which is so crazy that people pay me to do this, is that I actually get to get in front of people and I get to perform. You know what I mean? Like I feel passionate about this product that I'm selling, and I don't even have to sell it. I just get to show how it makes people's lives better, you know, and do all this. And you're getting to do the same thing too. And so I was just thinking, it's like, I bet when you first started your career, you probably weren't the guy that was so super comfortable getting up in front of crowds of people. I'm gonna give Mike a second to finish making all this crazy noise. Anyway,
Hey, Mikey.
You're dead to me, Mike. So I'm assuming when you first began your career, you weren't comfortable getting up in front of people and talking and doing all this stuff and being this guy that can kind of turn on and have as much charm and charisma as you do, because you're very charming and charismatic. And I know I love listening to you talk about technology, or really anything in particular, because you just have this passion behind everything you say. And so I was thinking about, he was saying that he does this trick where he just pretends that he's in his mom's living room and he's just performing for her, because he says no matter what, if he just pretends that, then he's in an environment where people support him, everybody wants him to see him do well, and that at the end of the day, mama loves me, so no matter what I do, it's going to be great. So it's like this little sort of mental trick he plays. And I was thinking, that is such an amazing way of looking at it. So when I go to this meeting, I like pretend that the people I see on screen, they want me to blow them away. You know what I mean? It's like they want me to do, as you know, so they're like rooting me on. So I don't know. It's like, it kind of helps me make this mental shift. But I was also thinking, what have I been doing with this podcast if not training myself to talk to people and in front of people, right? So I think this was probably the biggest transformation piece for me, was getting the opportunity to talk to you guys in this big capacity. Because I remember when I first did my very first mom presentation, how terrified I was, and my voice was shaking, and I was so scared. And then I think the LinkedIn Learning and Linda stuff, that was part of it too. But it comes back to what we said earlier, is if you want to do something, just start doing it. And so
yeah, you definitely need to do that, Greg. And like, that's part of the reason why I enjoy getting on this cast, is just talking to you guys and kind of improving my skills. To me, it just seems like a conversation with a couple of awesome guys. But
that's what it always is, right? It's always, you're just having a casual, you know what's the most engaging speakers to me are the people that are just having a conversation with me. You know, and I forget I'm sitting in a crowd of folks. They're so nonchalant about it, which you are. Every time I hear you talk, you just got this little bit of energy that you injected in.
Yeah.
So where do you what's your trajectory? Like, tell me where you started and then how you got to where you are.
So I started back in the late 90s working for, I guess what would be called a managed services provider now. That's how I started my career, and I was out in the field constantly. Like, these days with a lot of jobs, you can do everything remotely. You don't have to get in front of the customer. Mm-hmm. Back then, that wasn't the case. I was working for the largest radio network in New Zealand, that like broadcast radio network. And I used to have to go out there and work on their broadcast systems and the networks and all of the scheduling systems and stuff like that. And to do that, I needed to talk to the guys that were DJs in the booths and the admin staff. And I had to talk to people, and I just kind of naturally got good at creating a rapport with people. Mm-hmm. And as my career progressed, it kind of became a lot more technical. As I became more technical, I knew what the hell I was doing. and I just started to use those same approaches. Like, I just treated everyone fairly and tried not to treat people like idiots, and just get a rapport and treat it like a friendship, I guess you'd say. And that has been both good and bad. I mean, when you're dealing with customers, it's fantastic. When you're managing staff, not so much. Yeah, but I haven't got any specific tricks apart from I just try and form a rapport with people and treat them like they're my equal and my friends, and yeah, all right, that's it.
Well, how about when you get on a customer call and there's 20 faces and you don't know any of these folks? It's like, what do you do there?
That's hard, man. In that case, like, that is definitely hard. I've got used to it, though. So now I don't get flustered at all. I literally have my agenda, the thing that I'm there to talk to them about. I talk to them a little bit about what they're trying to do and their environment and try and get their challenges out of them, which most of the time is pretty easy, but for government types, I mean, they hold their cards close to their chest most of the time.
Right.
And once I've got that information out of them, I will just start talking about what I'm there to talk to them about. If I'm doing a presentation via Zoom or on a remote call, I'll do that. And I just keep it very light and friendly and try and target it towards the customer. It's always hard remotely though, especially when you can't see their faces.
Right.
I think that's the hardest thing for me. You can't. I'm big on reading facial expressions, like both a blessing and a curse. I can pretty much read what people are thinking by looking at them and their I guess how they move their hands and scratch their face and stuff. It's all like indications of how they're feeling about what I'm doing. And when you're on a remote call, you can't do that. And
you know,
makes it
I so identify with what you're saying. So whenever I did sales engineering before, I would give them a tour. So I'd give the data center tour, and I'd make jokes and dumb stuff like that to try to endear myself. But when it was over, we'd go to lunch, and to me, that's when the magic really happened. That's when, because I'm just a naturally curious person, and I'm so curious about people. So I start asking them about their favorite thing, which is themselves, and so. As you start getting in there, that I lock in and I get engaged, and I see people's attitudes change. I see, I've done tours before where the guy coming in, I remember one of the very last ones I did before I left Fibertown is I did a tour, and this guy was one of the key personnel on the team for choosing which data center they were going to go to, and he didn't actually want to outsource and move to a data center and all this stuff, right? And so he actually had, I think his mom got sick or something, so he ended up being out for like a week or 2 weeks, and so he missed all the tours of the data centers, and ultimately they had to choose one without him. So he came in with this big chip on his shoulder, and he let us know that very early in. Of course, the contract was already signed, so there was already ink to paper. This was already a done deal, but he was letting us know that he wasn't happy about that, and he was still unsure about coming this far, and all those things. And so by the end of it, after midway through the lunch, after just doing that, just establishing that rapport, establishing that relationship, and being genuinely curious about people, he said, I'm really glad we ended up coming here. This is I feel really good about this now. This was a really good, so it's so funny how you can disarm people by just being transparent and honest. I think that's it's very unexpected by folks.
I think that's part of the journey. And when I was younger, I used to, like, if I made a mistake or if I did something wrong, I would try and hide it because I didn't want to own that mistake. I didn't want to admit that I got something wrong. I did too. And I worked for a guy who was he was one of those guys that he always knew what he was thinking because he said it verbally. he just couldn't. It was hilarious. Anyway, the thing with working with him is when something went wrong, he would just outright say to the customer, look, we did this wrong. It's caused this problem. We're sorry about it, and this is what we're going to do to fix it. And he did that like for things that had gone wrong and cost the customer hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they were just like, okay. And once I saw that, I was just like, if you own the problems and you tell the person or customer how you're going to fix them, they're okay with it. Like, it's better to have that personal rapport and be honest with people. It's when you try and hide things, people can see through that, and then they start to not trust you, and then everything you've ever done comes into question. And that's how you lose relationships and lose customers. Yeah,
I've noticed once you, so there's that book I read, Leadership and Self-Betrayal, or no, something like that. Anyway, the idea being, as soon as you commit an act of self-betrayal, you go against what you know is right, bad stuff starts to happen after that, and I've noticed that. So even if it's not physical, it's in your head, and it's in your attitude, it's in your posture towards them, and no good can come of that. So it's definitely better to be open and honest. But also, like, early in my career, I didn't have any support. Like, when I became a network engineer, it's because everybody else quit, and I was all of a sudden here by myself. So I was so terrified to screw up. I didn't actually realize that, hey, even if I screw up, they don't have any other options. What are they going to do? I was just so and so like you, I tended to try and hide that stuff because it just, I wanted to be the guy that knew what he was doing. I was so terrified of the consequences or whatever. I didn't have that mentor per se, to show me that don't worry about it, it's going to be all right.
That's right, Greg, and I was the same. Like, I never had... I think my first job I had a mentor, but they quickly left and changed careers, so I was left without a mentor. And then from that point onwards, for probably about 10 years, I had no one to mentor me and show me how to kind of navigate this wild world that was professional IT. I was always the top guy, because, again, either people left or I was hired to be the top guy. And so, yeah, I was just in the same camp. The other thing that... I kind of learned over time, but I couldn't really describe it in words, is when I was a consultant, I'd be called in to go and see customers, and I'd go and visit these customers, and I felt that I was there to tell them what to do. Like, I'd ask them about their issues, and then I felt like I had to be the hero, that I had to prove my capability. But that is completely the wrong thing to do, I've since learned. Basically, when you're engaging with customers, you need to make them the hero. You need to make them feel like they are important, that they are able to contribute to the process, and that whatever you're going to do in your consulting or your professional services is going to make them look good. And if you can make the customer or potential customer feel like they're going to look good out of this, you're going to, one, establish rapport, two, establish trust, and three, you're going to get a good result because everyone's invested in it at that point. You're not like, so many times I'd go into large organizations or ISPs as a consultant, and there'd be a meeting in a meeting room with like 4 or 5 people, and you'd go in there all guns blazing, and all of a sudden you've alienated all these people because they're like, this guy's gonna take my job, or he's gonna make me look bad. And they'd become very defensive, especially in smaller towns and cities. People were in full job protection mode, and I always thought, oh, these people are just worried that I'm gonna make them look bad. And I didn't think much further about it. I never thought, well, how can I make them not feel that way? I just kind of wrote it off. But in hindsight, and with what I know now, you've got to make them feel like they're important, and that you're not going to show them up, and that they're going to be the hero at the end of it.
And that, that's emotional maturity, right? It takes time to realize that other people are humans too, and they have thoughts and feelings and worries and fears just like you, and that stuff's sometimes it's hard to get outside of yourself and say. But you know what? To that end, it's so easy sometimes to, like you said, involve them and make them feel like see, it could be as simple as, you know what, that's a great question. What do you think about that for a second? And then you put a little time and energy, and sometimes just acknowledging that, hey, that actually was a really good suggestion or a great question. So how do you think that evolution happened for you, and how long did it take? Because I bet it took a while, right?
I'll be honest, I've been through certain phases in my career. Like, early on, I actually naturally was good at that. I couldn't describe it. It just kind of happened through dealing with people. But as I became more senior and more technical and more focused on results, I was so mentally busy and all of my brain cycles were used up trying to make sure that solutions were delivered on time and that we didn't have any mistakes with our small team, and that I lost a lot of those soft skills, right. The ability to relate to people, because I was just so focused. And it's really when I've made changes in my career that I've had more time to spend on people and to formulate these ideas and actually get more visibility into how people work and how the process is actually working. And I've seen so many engineers, I guess I'd almost call this the engineer's journey, where they start off being really good with people, and then as they get more technical, they lose those people skills, and then something will happen in their life or career that'll make them think, hey, hang on, it's actually the people that matter. Like, the technical stuff's always going to keep changing, it's always going to keep happening, things are always going to go boom, but at the end of the day, it's the people that matter. And I guess that's the journey that I've taken, and I've seen so many other people take as well.
Do you think part of it is just that trying to be that technical guy that has all the information, the knowledge, is just exhausting? Like, not just mentally, but emotionally, and it trying to be that guy takes a toll at home too, right? You can't. Oh,
definitely.
You can't just leave that at work, right?
Definitely, and yeah, that's another thing that I see. Like, when I've worked with organisations where they've had a small team of engineers that are under a lot of load. You see them have problems with their home life, with their kids, go through divorces, all sorts of things. And you can't help but think this is related to the amount of stress and pressure they're under at work. It just changes everything. And a lot of people that are in IT management or in management of these firms, they don't see it. Like, people think they don't care, but they do care. They're just not aware of what's going on a lot of the time, and aren't aware that their engineers are working 14, 15-hour days and not getting to spend any time with their family, and that when they call them on the weekend, thinking they're the only person calling that staff member, that they don't realise that 3 or 4 other customers have rung them up and yelled at them as well.
Right.
And I don't know. I've just seen so many things over the years. You could take a negative view on it, or you could just look at the positive aspects as well. But yeah, you're right. It definitely does take a big impact on a lot of people.
But I think that's part of that journey you talked about too, right? It's everybody I know that's ever been in IT gets to their breaking point, right? And then then it'll back off for a little while. Then their breaking point, they'll find that it's just a little bit further out, and they'll reach that, and then, so they just kind of, I don't know. It's this weird ebb and flow, this cyclical process that it seems like we all go through, and it's interesting to me because how much my brain has already rewired itself just in the 2 months that 2 months to the day that I've been at Red Hat. Just how much my brain is rewired, not being on call. What I liken it to now is I had my head under the guillotine, and I never knew when it was fixing to drop. It could be midnight.
Yep.
It could be a week from now. I could have a really quiet month where I get a lot done, or all hell could break loose. And so just living under the threat of that, I don't know, it sucked so much life out of me. And so how much more energy I have. I have felt creative for the first time in probably like 5 years. Like I felt like making things and doing, it's such a strange feeling. It's such a strange place I find myself in, but I do feel like this is a journey, right? And so to enjoy something for what it is, you have to have some perspective. I was looking at, how Chromecast shows all those cool pictures as it just sort of cycles before you connect to it. There's this one where it was like this Italian village where it's built over this cliff, and just all these little houses up on there. And it's just, I looked at it, I said, wow, that's beautiful. And my wife's like, yeah, it sure is. I said, you know what? I bet if you were born there, this would just be the place that you hang out at. And so, it's like, it's not beautiful to you until you get some perspective, until you go somewhere else. You don't really see it for what it is, right? So I feel like all of that stuff, all those journeys, everything we put ourselves through, ultimately we're going to get someplace and we're going to look back at that, and that will give us the perspective required to really enjoy the places we find ourselves. So that's how I'm looking at it. I feel like I've reached some place where I can look back and really appreciate where I'm at, the people that have helped me along that journey, you and Mike included. So I think it's really interesting. And I know this all sparked from how do you deal with public speaking. But I don't know. I think that's all part of it too, right? As you go through that journey, you become more comfortable with yourself and in your own skin.
Yeah, you've actually reminded me. About 3 weeks ago, I had this random out of the blue call from a guy in New Zealand, and I'd worked with him in the past, and he was actually one of the guys that originally mentored me in the late 90s. And I'd become so used to people from the industry only calling me because they want something, that when he said he'd called me just to see how I was going and noticed I'd changed jobs, I was like flabbergasted. I was like, people don't ring me just for a chat. People ring me because they want something. And it was really odd, and it was quite refreshing. I ended up talking to the guy for a good 2 hours. It was pretty good.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't stress when my phone rings now. I rather look forward to it. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Definitely. Back to circling back around to what you were saying though, it's like public speaking and that sort of thing. If someone invites me to go and speak to an audience, if I go if I do heaps of preparation, like I do a slide pack and all that, I actually spend more time worrying about the timing of the content and all the things I've got to do than if I just make a list of subjects and I get up there and I just speak like they're my friends. Like if I do that, I always get like excellent feedback. They're like, "Oh, that was such a great presentation. I learned so much," and it's just like, I was just winging it, guys.
Well, Andrew Thrift, fire from the hip. Yeah.
But that's just how you make it natural and people will relate to it. It's like working in a big corporate, you see so many people, and I've been guilty of this too, where the day before they've got to do a presentation, they get sent a 100-slide PowerPoint, and they've got one night to get familiar with it, and you just get turned into robot mode. You're just like, blah, 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 blah. It's like, that's not very relatable. People don't get much value out of that. It's you've got to know the content, and you've got to be passionate about it. Like you were saying earlier, Greg, it's the passion that brings people in and makes them remember the presentation or the public speaking event or whatever. Yeah.
I think you're right. When it's conversational, it's like these people, they're not your audience now. They're like your co-conspirators, right? You're just sitting around. You're just telling stories to each other at this point, and
you're in it together.
Yeah, and it's like when you're natural and you're riffing. It's so much more engaging. I love those sorts of mentalities. And you know what I found out, and this goes back to kind of how much Red Hat talks about their culture, is that I prepared for that workshop that I was going to lead, and there was a slide deck, and it has all these slides. So they give you all the corporate slides, which is great. And there was a lot of stuff, and well, there's not a lot. There was like a small handful of slides in there. And I was like, God, this feels redundant. I don't really, I wouldn't really want to talk about this. And then when the guy gave us the slide deck to the thing, you could see like I don't know, 20% of the slides were like blacked out. He's like, yeah, I'm not going to talk about any of those. I was like,
oh yeah,
yeah, you could just arbitrarily, it's like if you feel like it interrupts the flow, if you want to, basically, here we're giving you this to work with. You can use this. You can modify it however you want. Just make it your own. And I love that because a lot of it, says a lot to me. So it's like I get to look at these slides and I get to interpret them how I want and give the narrative as I want people to see it. I get to build the story in their mind, right? I get to paint that picture however I like. I love that.
That's right. And I made the mistake early on of just parroting through the slides and thinking that's what I had to do. And it wasn't until I realized and listened to other people's presentations that if you just know the rough outline of what's on the slide and then just present it in your way that makes sense to you, you know what? It's going to make sense to other people too. And yeah, it's the way to go.
Yeah. And you know what's really crazy to me, which is strange, is that I've got a mentor. So whenever you come into Red Hat, you get assigned a mentor, which is awesome. And it's this guy, Michael Ford. And I'm going to say this about him because he'll never hear it, so it doesn't matter. Super nice guy, really engaging. And, so we were talking about like those slides and how some were blacked out or whatever. And he goes, what are your thoughts on that? And so I just, okay. So I just wrote, I was like, that slide, I wouldn't have blacked that one out because in this part, I like to say, so it was basically like one of the very first slides says, automation, and it gives a definition of that. And I was just saying that, I like to talk about this because, whenever you look at automation, I think everybody's got their own interpretation, their own opinion, right? It's more or less a buzzword that every manufacturer, every vendor sort of puts their own spin on. So it's really open for our interpretation. And to me, automation is, what's a task that I never want to do again? How can I automate that in an efficient, effective way so that I don't have to jack with this ever again? And I was like, and this slide deck I'm going to go through, it's going to show some stuff in varying ways and how we do it. I was like, but automation isn't paint by numbers. I'm not going to give you everything precisely how to do it, right? So you take this and you interpret it to be your own and you make it work for you, right? And so to me, that's kind of the power of like Ansible, is that while there is a framework and there are best practices, there's wiggle room inside there, right? And you can adapt it to be your own. And it's one of the things I really love about it, right? There's no one. It's kind of like Mikrotik. There's no. You could do the same thing 10 ways. Some are probably the absolute wrong way. Some are not the best. And some are definitely the right way. But there's a lot of different ways to do it, right? And so, what's funny is there was like a couple of things on slides, and he was like, you know what? A lot of times I skip that slide, but I'm going to adjust the presentation. So when I give it, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit myself. I was thinking and this guy's been doing it for a while, and just running into that, no hubris, right? There's no ego associated with it. He's openly asking me my opinion, the new guy, what do I think about this? And he's actually adapting to that. And to me, that is inspiring, and it really is, because for so long in my career, I was so afraid to not have the answer, to be wrong about something, and at points in my career, I hoarded information, kept it just for myself.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean. And so
that's another common one on the engineer's journey, Greg.
And so part of my brain, when he first said something like that to me, I said, "Oh no, he's gonna steal my stuff." You know what I mean? It was like that was the little green monster in my head popping out, and then I realized, you know what? It doesn't matter if somebody says something word for word the way you say it. They don't have your passion. They don't have your charisma. They don't have your views on things, right? So when it comes out of their mouth, it's going to be a different story than when you say it. So if you can help somebody along in their journey, if you can make them better, especially people on your team, right? That rising tide is going to bring everybody up. And so as much progress as I've made, I've still got those demons, those little voices in my head, right? And so it's tough.
Yeah,
I don't think that's ever going to completely go away. I hope I get better about it.
I'm the same, Greg. Like, I worked for an organization for a long time that was very what I'd call cloak and dagger, or people in Northwest nice, I think is the American term. You'd say something you'd be having a conversation with someone, and they'd give you an answer about a contentious topic, and you think, oh, okay, they're on board. We've got this. And then they'd go behind your back and completely stab you as soon as you're not looking. They'd go to your boss and say, oh, Thrifty said this or Thrifty said that, and create drama internally. And I worked for an organization like that for 10 years of my career, and saw a lot of that happening on. It was just that everyone was afraid that everyone else was going to stab them in the back, and there was a lot of information hoarding. I was guilty of it for sure, and a lot of negative attitudes and stressed out people. And breaking free of that mentality takes some time. And there's always that element where you think, if I say this, is someone going to stab me in the back? And even now that I'm in a really open, welcoming company and a different career path, you still kind of have that in the back of your mind, and it takes a while to change.
I get better by millimeters. Not maybe even smaller than that. It's not big leaps and bounds. It's small little things like that.
Yeah.
But I'm always going to have those demons. I'm always going to have the anxiety, in some way or another. But man, it's, most of my breakthroughs come from people. And so I like to think, in my head, I wish I had a mentor early on that kind of helped me, and I think I just try and be that mentor for other people. Like you were talking about, when things break, it's okay. Whenever I'd have a new engineer and he would break something, I would just be calm and I'd say, it's no big deal. Stuff happens. I was like, guess what? Tomorrow you're going to come to work and everything's going to be the same, and you're going to go home and you're going to eat your cheeseburger and nothing will be different.
The world keeps turning.
Yeah, man. So nobody's gonna come to your house and kill your dog. So you're gonna, you know what I mean? You don't have to go Keanu Reeves on them.
Yeah. One other thing that helped me with the public speaking, I mean, public speaking itself has never been an issue for me. It's more been doing, I guess, webinars and things like that I've struggled with. Even recently, found it hard. But there's a guy I work with. He's South African, and he's just a brilliant presenter, and I thought, this guy's such a natural. And one of the things he does is, when he's got an audience there, he does these magic tricks. And because he's South African, everyone calls him the magic prawn. But basically, we'll be in this audience of guys that they're in the IT industry, but they're not full-on techos or anything. So having a techo talk with them is not going to help. So and you can't deal with them one-on-one, so you can't establish a rapport with these people one-on-one, because there's 20 people in the room or at the dinner table or whatever it is. So he'll do these magic tricks, and it instantly draws the entire crowd in. It's to the point where I won't give it away, but he's got something embedded in his body that he uses for these magic tricks. That's how committed he is to them.
That's baller.
So like he's got a tattoo on his body that he integrates into these magic tricks, and like I've seen him just have these like military types completely enthralled, and he's established a rapport with them immediately. And I thought, well, this guy's such a natural at this. And it wasn't until I started working with the guy closely and doing webinars and things with him and saw that he gets super stressed doing these presentations beforehand and how much time and effort he puts into all of these, that I realized that even the guys that seem like the top professionals at presenting get anxious, they get stressed out, they put huge amounts of time into this. It doesn't come naturally to anybody. Like, everybody has to put the work in. So yeah, just remember that when you're presenting. So
yeah. That's yeah, I mean, everybody's human. Doesn't matter
exactly
who
right.
they are, where they are in their journey, where they're from. They're all human. You know that you're talking about South African. This is a quick derailment, but the very first consulting customer I ever had was this guy out of South Africa, really nice guy. And so I remember getting up early in the morning. I helped him with whatever his problem was. I can't remember. And we were talking about his towers and stuff like that. And so I was saying, I don't remember how we got on the conversation, but I was saying here in the U.S., like in our colder climates, they have these things called ice bridges that we put on our towers because, JJ Boyd actually told me that one time he mounted some radios to the top of an ice bridge. And so the whole thing of an ice bridge is you put your radios under it, because when these big sheets of ice fall off of radios 50 foot up, it doesn't shear your radio in half. And I was like, so you guys have to worry about this stuff? He's like, no, we have to worry about the baboons. I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, we have these baboons that like to climb our towers and tear our radios off. I was like, are you serious? And he goes, this is Africa. And I was like, yeah, I guess, man. And it's like, I remember that made me feel like this big, like teeny. I've got my fingers really close together. I was like, wow, that's, it just, I don't know. It was just so crazy. All of a sudden to be transported to the other side of the world. That was a long time ago for me. But yeah, it was just, this is Africa. So I say that sometimes whenever I have a realization on something. Yeah. This is, it is a real thing.
We're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah. I've been having those moments a lot lately. So it's good. Well, Mikey, what's the story?
Which story is that?
I don't know any of them. You showing up late? I assumed you had a flat tire. You had something very important to take care of.
One of my friends came over to help me do some drainage projects, and he didn't get to my house till like 12:30 in the afternoon, so did not make for a lot of time to work.
Such is life. People are doing you favors. What can you do? Oh, yeah. Man. So that's all I had to talk about. What's good, Mike? What's new and important that you need to talk about?
So I have either of you heard of Artemis?
Yes.
On Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
It's possible, but unlikely that we're talking about the same thing. So it's an open source project. It appears to be based out of the Europe area, though I'm not confident in that. And it's basically an open source version of BGPmon that you can self-host. So what I did, I just got some cheap VPS. It's actually in Helsinki because it didn't matter where it was. I just needed it to be cheap. And I spun up a VM and installed Artemis. It's my first time really using Docker, so there's lots of things that I kind of stumbled across in figuring out why it didn't work. And then Docker uses YAML, and then YAML has all kinds of quirks. Spent hours on if it was 5 spaces or a tab. Anyway, and so what it'll do is it'll alert you, and by alert, they have a variety of methods. I believe email and Slack are among them. And it'll alert you when it detects that somebody has hijacked your prefixes or ASNs or whatever. And it uses BGP feeds from route views, from RIPE. You can inject your own BGP routes, however you manage to do them. And so then, you can monitor how many of these things you want. And I haven't used BGPmon, but from Nick, I can't say his last name now.
Braulio.
Braulio.
Nick B. Nick B told me about it, and he said that it basically looks like BGPmon, but better, because it's been developed recently, as opposed to being bought by Cisco.
Every time you say BGPmon, I just imagine that's the Rastafarian process they use in Jamaica.
It could be, and so what it's not in there yet, but it's on their feature request list. They do have traceroute functionality, so that when there's a hijack detected, it will traceroute to it, with the intent of providing information more about where it is. Recently, we were looking at a BGP hijack of some kind, and we knew, upstream AS down, but we didn't know where. It was from AS2. Well, AS2 wasn't doing it. Somebody else had hijacked AS2 and then had hijacked the address space. And there's a variety of things that it may actually be, which I can talk about later. But once they get that next version out that has the traceroute functionality, then there's no discussion. That's where it is.
Yeah.
And it'll use RIPE Atlas to do the traceroute. So it's not just tracerouting from your server. It'll traceroute from, I'm assuming tens or hundreds of devices all throughout the internet to figure out, where this, who can reach you and who cannot, and how they get there. And it was pretty easy to set up, other than the YAML quirks. So I'd recommend that everybody goes and at least spins up a VPS and tries it out. I did it external to my network, despite the fact that I have more than enough internal capacity, server-wise, because my thought was, if somebody hijacks my network, I can't get alerted from the internal server if it's been hijacked. Yeah, well, potentially. Whereas if I put it on somebody else's network, if my network gets hijacked, I still have an email Gmail, and then it can go through to my phone and never have to worry about it.
It's interesting to see, hey, my BGP prefix was hijacked, but what do you do? I get a real world, real live, real time detection and alert. Now what?
All depending on the information that you're presented with. Now it's now you have to go to. Really, RIPEstat seems to be the best place I found on the internet to punch in prefixes or ASs and figure out neighbors and how long they've been advertising and just a variety of information. But then you have to trace down the AS or upstream ASs if that AS doesn't cooperate, and tell them, hey, this is being hijacked, and just wait for them to filter it out. Or I wouldn't recommend this long term, or you could then change your advertisements to be more specific. If you're normally advertising a /21 and they copy your /21, Well, there's advertised 2/22s, and now it doesn't matter.
Why not hijack them back?
But
jack their jack.
I've had to do that in the past, actually. People, previous upstream transit providers have made changes to their systems and started advertising our networks out to the public internet. Like they've re-imported historic configuration, even though we were no longer using them anymore. And they'd obviously had network statements or something horrific for our ranges. And all of a sudden, they'll start advertising exactly that, a /21 out to the public internet. And I've had to very quickly change it to advertise multiple /22s or 24s to get everything working again, and then make an angry phone call. Yeah.
What does an angry phone
sometimes
call for you sound like, Thrift? Do you get really high pitched?
No, I don't. I just I pace my words. Like I make every word heavy, just so it has maximum impact and people know that I'm angry.
You don't say at the end, by the way, guys, this is my angry voice, just so you know.
No, but yeah, when it's local to you, it's easy to find them. However, when it's like out on the public internet in some like remote location, it could be really hard. So that traceroute feature is pretty awesome, like. Yeah, and I used to use BGPmon years ago, and it was actually a good product when it was being updated. But once Cisco took them over, it's like abandonware almost. It's still got this like ancient web interface, and it's hard to use. And getting hold of their billing department is horrific. So yeah, I actually moved to Thousand Eyes, I think it was, and that was good. But it was actually it was reasonably expensive from memory, and it was a little bit harder to train up the other engineers on how to use it. But I did really like it.
Speaking of
great.
Cisco products, didn't they just acquire them?
They did.
Yeah,
they did.
Someone just bought those.
Yeah, I think it's like 3.7 billion or something they paid for.
You're kidding me?
No.
I need to make 1,000 eyes.
No, make 1,001 eyes. There you go.
Yeah.
Just one up them. Because it's like, it doesn't sound like that complex a concept. So, maybe that is a lot of money.
Yeah. It May 29th. Or no, May 28th, Cisco announces intent to acquire Thousand Eyes.
Yeah, on the surface you think it's not that complicated, but if you're doing it at the scale of Thousand Eyes, with all those pollers and all that data collection, like you'd have to make your code pretty efficient, so...
Yeah, I mean, I would assume they have at least 1,000 locations, at least.
You're such a dingus. I always thought like the idea was that you would put like a probe out in your customer's network to monitor their stuff, but then it could also do some probing to other customers or something like that. That'd be a pretty neat I mean, obviously they would have to agree to some stuff, or disagree, or whatever. But that would be pretty neat if you had 10,000 customers and 5,000 of them allowed you to use them as remote probes as well, so you could test kind of all kinds of crazy stuff.
Cisco can do that.
Yet, being as though we've got Artemis, which is essentially an open source version of BGPmon, I wonder if there's anything out there that would do what Thousand Eyes does. Could build a network of sensors and test, any sensor to any sensor. You could just, drop some Raspberry Pis wherever you feel like, and run them back to your server.
No doubt there is, Mike.
Audience, please let us know. Well, I guess Ripe Atlas is kind of like that. I mean, it's not open sourced, but you can make it do a lot of those things.
So, Mike, this brings me on to something Greg and I had discussed before you got here. What are your thoughts on RPKI and it being integrated into Mikrotik router Ospf and how it suits the global internet today?
I'm looking forward to it. I can no longer get to feel like a second class internet citizen. I can well, assuming I have upstreams that do all the correct things as well, which I'm sure they don't. But at least then I can say I do.
Yeah.
My $1,000 Mikrotik router is doing RPKI. Why can't your insert big iron here. And it probably can, they're just not doing it.
For the reasons Greg and I talked about earlier, big providers don't like change.
More and more big providers are making that RPKI change. NTT, AT&T, those are two of the largest networks in the world, and they've gone full into it. I don't remember who else for the big guys has, but there's been, every few months there's somebody else that says, "Yep, we're going to do it now too." I think Cloudflare's doing it.
They are.
I look forward to that. I mean, it's not going to fix everything, but every one of these steps will just make it so much safer on the internet in terms of hijacks.
There's no silver bullet, but it's a layered approach, right? You add a little bit here, add a little bit here, add a little bit here. Eventually, it gets pretty solid. Hopefully, gone will be the days where we see these crazy hijacks and crazy leaks. Because I can't remember the last time I saw a malicious hijack. It was always just some guy junked up something and it leaked out. Or I'm sure as Nick Braulio would love to talk about the virtues of BGP optimizers.
I like to talk about those too, Greg. I've seen some pretty big mistakes happen.
I've seen my route optimizer do some pretty wackadoo stuff too. So they're not problem free, but they can't help.
Yeah, Job Schneiders, who works for NTT. I think he's still NTT. He contributes to OpenBGP pretty significantly. He brought something up on Nanog, I think about 2 years ago. There's actually a provider here in Australia that was using Route Optimizer and didn't have their BGP filters set correctly and started advertising out all of these smaller prefixes for a lot of other internet providers, and it just caused utter chaos. It was pretty bad. So, my thoughts are the route optimizers are a brilliant idea. Like, the way they go about it is pretty cunning and pretty cool. But unless you've got your route filters on your border routers set, perfectly, there's just so much room for error.
That was the very first thing I put into place when we put in our route optimizers. Is any routes coming from the route optimizer would get community attached to it, and then in the outgoing filters, the very first thing it filters in the list is anything sourced from that community. Just like, no, not a chance. It's never leaving.
Yeah, this actually brings me on to another piece of BGP best practice that I've very rarely seen implemented. You should, on your internal network, have a community, or have communities to signify where routes have originated. So you should have a community to say you paired with Cloudflare, that routes originated at Cloudflare. You shouldn't rely on their communities or their AS path. You should have a community that your border router that pairs to them is attaching to the route. Likewise, if you've got transit customers that are buying transit from you, you should have a community that you're putting onto those routes, and your border routers should only advertise that community out to the internet. If that community is not there, they shouldn't advertise it. And I've seen a bunch of people that have been on-selling transit that are not using communities. They're effectively just advertising anything in their table out to the internet with a simple filter that's matching on prefix. And that is a recipe for disaster. So
I remember you talking about how you did that on ingress. So like all of your peerings, all of your upstreams, you actually tag it uniquely based on the source it comes from. And I thought that was such a clever idea just for troubleshooting inside your tables. So if you
definitely is, yeah,
you look up a route in your table, you see that community attached, you know exactly which provider that's going to be coming from and ultimately exiting.
And you, so I've always attached a community for that particular data center, so that location. I've attached them for the country that the routes originated in, if it's a ISP that spans multiple continents or countries, as well as what provider it's come in on. That way you don't have to have community sprawl per se. You don't need a community for Cloudflare in Auckland and another one for San Francisco. You can just have one for Cloudflare and then signify which data center it's come in with an additional community. And definitely makes troubleshooting easier, and using them internally to signify transit customers also saves you from potential embarrassment down the track.
Yeah, it's very clever.
some time ago there was a Nandlog presentation by one of the guys from NLayer. I think I just loaded it up here. And this is the one. It's 60 pages about how NLayer built their community structure, and it's this digit is for the region. This digit is for which type of route it is. Is it a customer? Is it a peer? Is it a this? This route, just each digit in the community means something to them, and then they can just pragmatically determine from the community whatever they needed to know. I started to do that, and then I realized that it didn't work as well with my 32-bit AS and all the things that went with that. So
I've always just had a simple table. Like I've had my information communities, which are the ones I've just been talking about, and then I've had my action communities. So usually the information ones are like, as I said, data center, location, provider, whatever that it's come from, and then action communities are things like black holes and prepends and all those sort of things. And you just keep it simple. It doesn't need to be too complicated, and it works at scales as well. Even on a large provider, you can do that.
Very nice. Very nice. Let's see. Mikey, Andrew, we are at the 2-hour mark. Andrew, I know this is probably an hour and a half past how much time you actually had allotted for this. So,
that's right, man.
Do you guys want to, Mikey, do you have anything burning a hole in your pocket you need to get out of there, or you want to stick a fork in it?
I'm sure I had something I was anxious to talk about, but I'm sure I forgot it. Do many platforms do fib compression?
Maybe that's a Thrift question.
I don't know. I don't know the true answer to that, Mike. I'm thinking about the process of this in my head. They might do it inside the ASIC to save space, but then it's going to take longer to look up the table. So surely they just pump it in there raw straight into the TCAM or the RAM or whatever they're using and look it up that way. Like compressing it's just another step. I know platforms definitely use rib compression, but fib is not something I've really thought about too much. The thought thinking about it makes my brain hurt though. All the things that could go wrong.
I believe I saw that Arista has that feature available, and from what I can tell, what they do is internally, whichever peer has the most prefixes coming from it or going to it, once your best path is done, it just ignores all those and says default route to this.
Oh yeah, Greg and I were talking about that earlier, but it's effectively route summarization between the rib and the fib. Yeah, rather than compression, it's just an advanced, I guess you'd call it an AI form of fib compression, to use the marketing terminology these days. But yeah,
machine learning, maybe something like that.
Yeah, machine learning.
Everybody loves that buzzword.
All right. Well, I guess I have nothing useful because you already talked about it.
Sorry, mate. That's what you get, bud. You get the scraps. You get the leftovers. All right. Let's do the wrap up. So, Mikey, from Chicago, if people want to get a hold of you out on the internet, how do they go about that?
Leave me alone.
All right. Fair enough. I'll leave you alone. Andrew Thrift, thank you again for talking to us. How do you want people to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is the easiest way. Platform I use now. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. You know what? I've been working on my LinkedIn foo as well. I've been trying to be more responsive on there, trying to actually put out content and things like that. And There's actually, I can't remember, but I'll send you guys the link, or I'll post the link in here. But there's like some kind of LinkedIn promoter score or something like that. There's like a secret URL you can go to that'll give you like a indication of how tapped into your industry you happen to be, or how influential you are. So mine was actually not too bad, and I hadn't really been doing anything. So now that I've been putting a little work into it, I wonder what it looks like. We'll see. I've seen you put out some. I've seen you resharing some of your stuff, Thrift. So you're playing the game.
Yeah, I'm about to step it up a level. Yeah.
All right. Well, you do it, and
you'll
then
see in a few weeks.
Tell me how to do it, and we'll see how it goes. I'll follow in the steps of the footsteps of greatness there. So if you want to get a hold of me, greg@gregsoul.com. As always, I'm actually starting to blog a lot more because I'm learning so much stuff. I have to put it on there. So as soon as it falls out of my head, you know what? It's crazy. I've got this text document that I'm building. So every time I find like an instable tidbit, I throw it in there, and I'm at about 3,500 lines now. So I've been putting a lot of stuff in there, and I need to start kind of cohesively putting that together. And as I run into questions that I have to Google, I'm kind of making little guides. Like in Ansible, what's the difference between command module, shell module, and raw module? And I was like, I don't know, so I had to look it up and do a little research, and so I'm trying to document that stuff. Anyway, I digress. If you want to get a hold of me, probably the best way of really doing that is through the Little Brothers Wisp Slack. You go to patreon.com/The Brothers Wisp, throw us a couple bones, you get access to the Slack, you get access to all of these faces you see on here, and a lot of other really intelligent, competent people.
I'd just like to add, the Slack has been getting amazing. Like, even the new people coming onto the Slack have been contributing, and I've been learning a lot, and it's just a really good environment. Yeah.
You know what blows me away is I don't have time to go and research and play and tinker and toy as much as I used to, and these guys are doing it for me. It's like as Tom over here, or Tommy C, or Matt, or anybody, as these guys really dive into something and do the research, do the comparisons, they share that information, and they freely share that information. And now I don't have to, and I just have to try and remember what they said. So it's it's really good. An amazing resource. It's been awesome for me. I love how I'll talk a little bit about Ansible, and then I'll get good questions in the automation channel, and it's actually helping me learn stuff. And and I finally have things I can contribute again, because there's not as many people doing automation, and there's way too many smart people on routing in there, so I don't have nothing to contribute there. So I'm glad I can actually kind of give back again. But everyone, thank you for listening. I know it's crazy days we're in, so there's less time for this sort of thing, and we had made this one extra long. So it's always entertaining having you, Andrew Thrift. Thank you so much for spending your time here. Mikey,
thanks for having me, guys.
Always appreciate you coming. So everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Start searching, shooting up the web in neighborhoods, net surfing. We got horrible jokes, we're loud and annoying, but we're informative facts, we're not disappointing. Just give us a listen, cause fun is the mission. I'm telling you, you don't know what you are missing. Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.